The past decade has brought about a large increase in plant-based meat alternatives to help people reduce their meat consumption for many reasons. These include environmental concerns, ethical considerations, as well as a focus on personal health and well-being. And finding alternatives to meat is something that has a lot of potential to help reduce chronic disease risk, both in the United States as well as around the world. So I'd like to review plant-based meat alternatives, which I'm gonna refer to as fake meat, but I'm gonna do it strictly from a health perspective. And first, what I'm gonna do is review the respective benefits of eating plants versus meat, and some of the science behind why we know that substituting plant-based whole foods will improve your overall health. Then I'm gonna dive into some of the research about meat alternatives. Now, this is a very young industry, and the products vary wildly depending on how you classify a meat alternative. So much of the research is still underway to try and determine the actual health implications. But I'm gonna try and give you an idea of the potential risks and benefits that are emerging from these fake meats, in addition to reviewing some of what we know about processed plant foods in general. And finally, we'll discuss where plant-based meat alternatives land as part of a long-term dietary strategy. Now, if you haven't noticed, meat alternatives have become a lot more readily available recently, and the data actually shows that very clearly. The availability of meat alternatives has increased 62% over the past decade in restaurants, to the point where almost half of all restaurants now offer some form of pseudo-meat alternative on their menu, and the number is even higher in grocery stores. It's hard to measure the alternative meat industry since there's such a wide definition of what a meat alternative can be, but experts claim that the industry is consistently growing at about 15% per year and is going to explode into a multi-billion-dollar industry. And some numbers project that it is actually going to be a $100 billion industry in the next 5 years, and that's a big deal. Now, this is happening at the same time as a 300% increase in people choosing to follow a plant-based diet over the last 15 years. And that number grows when you add in the meat-conscious or the flexitarian diets for people that might be aware of the challenges of eating meat, even if they still choose to consume some meat in moderation. So overall, what we're seeing is a huge trend where people around the world are seeking out alternatives to meat, or outright replacing meat in their diets completely. And this is a good thing for many reasons. And when you ask a very simple question, which is fake meat a healthy choice for you? The answer can get a little bit cloudy and a little bit complicated. Now, to some, plant-based meats have been hailed as a savior because they're gonna make your life easier to eat plants, and you'll still get to enjoy the flavors and smells and textures of meat. But when you look at the data and the studies that exist already, it gets a little bit more complicated, just to say the least. Now, the world of meat alternatives, plant-based meats and lab-grown meats is still very, very young from a research perspective. Good science can take decades to complete and analyze, and that's even more true in the context of a young, evolving industry that is changing by the day. So I'll come out and say that there's still a lot that we don't know about meat alternatives, but it may be years before we have a full picture. But I will share with you what we do know so far. Now, let's start with addressing the overall trend. The research we do have shows an undeniable correlation that moving from eating meat to eating more plant-based material is a good thing for your health. We've talked about this ad nauseum on this channel, and there's plenty of videos to back that up. Now, we're not gonna get too deep in that topic because we actually have two specific videos in particular that you can watch that'll give you a lot more detail on this. One is about eating a carnivore diet, and another one is about increasing the amount of protein that you put in your diet. Okay, it's always worth taking a look at those two videos because it'll give you some background information. But for the time being, if you haven't seen those videos, that is totally fine. Studies have shown that plant-based diets are found to reduce the risk of insulin resistance, prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and lead to higher insulin sensitivity, which is a key marker in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes that's associated with improved health outcomes. Studies have also shown that a plant-based diet is better for weight control, drawing from a number of large-scale epidemiological studies and meta-analyses. Individuals who follow plant-based diets mark consistently higher on all indicators of cardiovascular health, notably including a marked difference in cholesterol, as well as significantly reduced blood pressure than their meat-eating counterparts. The research also shows promising benefits for brain health, including key markers of executive control and brain function. And studies have shown that plant-based diets are effective in promoting gut health, providing positive effects like an increased metabolic performance of intestinal microbiota, as well as improved presence of positive microflora and an increased microbiome diversity. Studies have shown that the phytochemicals from eating high plant-based diets can actually benefit your skin, which is compounded by the fact that these high antioxidant foods help reduce oxidative stress, which can in turn damage your skin. You'll become more disease resistant with a reduced risk of everyday colds and flus, reduced risk of cardiovascular diseases, stroke, cancer, kidney disease, liver disease, and beyond. And plant-based diets also increase overall longevity with a reduced risk of all-cause mortality, cognitive decline, and reduced physical signs of aging. All of this sounds very compelling, and personally, I don't need any more research to demonstrate that the power of a plant-based diet is real. And it's even more pronounced when you factor in the risks of eating fake meat. Now, on the flip side, eating a high meat diet is associated with an increased risk for just about every health complication that you can think of. Meat, especially processed meats like bacon, cold cuts, sausages, hot dogs, and hamburgers, increase your risk of type 2 diabetes, while eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables reduces your risk for diabetes. In addition to that, the World Health Organization, or the WHO, classified processed meats as class 1A carcinogens, which means that they're not just suspected to cause cancer, they do, without a shadow of a doubt, increase your risk for cancer. They also classified red meats, including pork, beef, and lamb, as class 2A carcinogens, which means that they quote unquote probably cause cancer. Other studies show very clearly that high levels of meat increase the risk for all-cause mortality, and that plant-based protein-rich foods actually have a protective effect. And major players like the American Heart Association have extensively studied meat and found increased consumption to be directly correlated with increased risk for heart disease and obesity. Like we've already said, you can explore these two videos that I mentioned earlier to see these studies in more detail, but the correlation is clear. Switching from eating meat to whole plant-based foods is going to improve your health in a vast majority of cases. So it makes sense for people to be interested in switching from a carnivore or a meat-heavy diet to mostly plant-based diets, or cutting out meat entirely if you so choose. But that correlation gets a little bit more complicated when you talk about fake meat. Let's see exactly why. Let's start by focusing on how fake meat is created. Now, these fake meats are usually comprised of isolated pea or soy protein, a plant-based fat like coconut or safflower oil, and some sort of binding agent to wrap it all together. Now, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat said that the building blocks of their burgers are plants. The Beyond Burger has about 18 ingredients, including purified pea protein, coconut and canola oils, rice protein, potato starch, and beet juice extract for coloring. Beyond Meat says it uses no genetically modified or artificially produced ingredients. The Impossible Burger is made with similar basic ingredients, but it gets its protein largely from soy and potato, and it uses an iron-containing compound from soy called heme to enhance the burger's meaty flavor. Now, both products use methyl cellulose, a plant derivate commonly used in sauces and ice creams, to act as a binder. Seitan, which is made from washing the start off of a wheat flour, is another popular option as the base, but ultimately the goal is the same, which is to mix them up into a similar texture, flavor, and macronutrient profile as the meat that originally would come from an animal. Now let's take a look at the ingredients inside the Impossible Burger, one of the most popular imitation meats. There's quite a lot of ingredients, and I can guarantee you that only about 3 of them you'll actually find in your pantry. And while that's not always a bad thing, it should certainly show up and alarm you that there could be some red flags in looking at those ingredients. And there's one more thing that we want to highlight out here: the macronutrient profile of these fake meats. They're high in protein, they're high in fat, especially saturated fat, with very low carbohydrate content. We're going to explore all of this in the next section. Now, the fact that there are no meat products in here is usually a good thing, but here at Mastering Programs, we also recommend whole, minimally processed, which is where imitation meats can run into some problems. So even though these products are technically plant-based, they contain preservatives, binding agents, artificial flavorings, and texturizers, which increases the risk for adverse health consequences if you eat them frequently. And this shouldn't be a surprise to you at this point. Research clearly demonstrates that as you increase your intake of processed foods, your risk for conditions like hypertension, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease in general will increase. Now, again, we can't make any assumptions that every food manufacturing process is going to have negative health consequences. But the moment you start removing whole ingredients and replacing them with processed ingredients, you are asking for trouble in the long term. So now let's bring that image back up on the screen for the nutrition facts of an Impossible Burger. Something that immediately jumps out is both the fat and the protein content. A single burger contains 14 grams of fat, 8 of which are saturated, 19 grams of protein, and 9 grams of carbohydrate. So if you're a low carbohydrate advocate or a keto advocate, then this is probably a great option for you. But also one thing, let's make sure that you understand that there are 3 servings per container. So if you choose to eat the entire container, then you have to multiply all those numbers by 3. When it comes specifically to the protein content, you can watch a video that we recorded earlier by clicking on the top of the screen. And in that video, you're gonna learn that diets that are high in protein have a similar effect than diets that are high in fat, in that they can significantly increase your development of insulin resistance. Now in that video, what I talked about was the fact that when you eat a high protein diet, that can actually suppress your blood glucose in the 3 hours following a meal, and it can help promote weight loss in the short term, and both of those are good things. However, high protein diets cause delayed blood glucose rises that start at about 3 hours after you consume the meal, and they increase your baseline level of insulin resistance in the long term. And to make things even worse, these effects are additive, meaning that if you have a diet that's high in protein and a diet that's high in fat simultaneously, then you have an even larger chance of developing insulin resistance because they are additive. Protein and fat have additive effects on insulin resistance. As a matter of example, suppose that you ate a meal that contains 30 grams of fat and 40 grams of protein, which is not uncommon, and it also had 30 grams of carbohydrate. Again, not uncommon. Your postprandial glycemia, or your postprandial blood glucose, can be increased by as much as 100 milligrams per deciliter in that state. So please watch that video and understand everything that's being communicated. What's interesting about the nutrition facts that you just saw on the screen is that fake meat does contain fiber, but real meat does not. And that's generally speaking a good thing. But compared to real beef, the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Meat Burger are considerably higher in sodium, and you have to take this into account because an uncooked 4-ounce beef patty has about 75 milligrams of sodium, but the Impossible Burger contains 370 milligrams, and the Beyond Meat Burger contains 390 milligrams of sodium, which is about a 5x increase in sodium content. So definitely take that into account. So does this mean that eating one burger is going to destroy your health? No, of course not. That's not what we're trying to communicate. We just want you to be aware that even though you're going to be better off eating a fake meat burger than you are the actual meat that comes from an animal, I want you to just be aware of how much you're consuming, because there are trade-offs that you're making simply by choosing that option. Now, like we said at the beginning of this video, you might notice that the language we're using up until this point is about sort of probablys and likelies and do this to be safe. And that's because when it comes down to it, there simply isn't a ton of research about how fake meat impacts human health. So what we can do is go through study by study and demonstrate what the scientific world does know up to this point, and it'll give you a good understanding of what areas of opportunity there are for the future. First things first. Earlier this year, researchers conducted an optimization study in French adults to explore the potential of plant-based meat by improving dietary patterns and substituting that for real meat. They analyzed 2 types of substitutes, which is an average substitute and a nutritionally designed substitute fortified with zinc and with iron. The study revealed that the quote-unquote optimized substitute, when fortified, significantly reduced red meat consumption up to about 90% and offered better nutrition contributions in vitamins B6 and vitamin C, as well as fiber, ALA or alpha linoleic acid, and a lower sodium intake. And that indicates that a well-designed plant-based substitute or a well-designed fake meat burger can be effective in promoting healthier choices and healthier diets. Researchers found that replacing traditional meats with these alternatives, if you do so, that the subjects improve their nutrient intake and then overall increase their diet quality, contributing to better health and sustainable food practices in the long term. So generally speaking, this is a good thing. Another study published earlier this year explores the benefits of incorporating plant-based meat alternatives, otherwise known as PBMAs, to reduce the reliance on animal products and increase protein intake. The authors emphasized the importance of these PBMAs, emulating the taste and the texture and the appearance of meat so that it can gain wider acceptance among meat eaters. The study also compares the nutritional attributes of PBMAs with both meat and with whole plant foods, such as legumes and grains and nuts and seeds. And it highlights that properly designed PBMAs can provide consumers with similar sensory products as you would find in a traditional meat product, which makes them more likely to be embraced, especially in cultures where meat has traditionally played a central role. So overall, the study advocates for a complementary approach with PBMAs and with whole plant foods working together to promote sustainable and health-conscious dietary choices. The next study suggests that reducing meat consumption and increasing plant-based food aligns with climate change and with health promotion strategies. Not a shocker. And it emphasizes the need for a deeper understanding of the determinants of plant-based food choices to accelerate this transition away from eating meat and towards more plant-based choices. Okay, the research highlights the importance of novel plant-based meat alternatives in promoting sustainable and health-conscious food systems. And all of these are good because they demonstrate that substituting meat consumption with plant-based meat alternatives is a wise choice, not only for human health, but for animal welfare as well as for the environment. Okay, but here's the question. What about the health risks of eating fake meat? Are there any, and is it worth paying attention to? In other words, do we have enough information? Now, according to this study published in 2021, an increasing number of people are shifting towards plant-based eating for both environmental and health reasons. To cater to this demand, new plant-based meat alternatives, the PBMAs, have flooded the market, promising sustainability and health benefits. But here's the catch. Researchers found that not all plant-based meat substitutes are created equal. They compared traditional and novel plant-based diets to an omnivore diet. The good news is that diets with traditional plant-based meat substitutes meet daily nutrient requirements and were lower in saturated fat, which is good, lower in sodium, and lower in sugar compared to the omnivorous diet. However, the diets that are based on fake meat fell short in meeting essential nutrients like calcium and potassium and vitamin B12 while having higher levels of saturated fat, sodium, and sugar. Now, researchers in Brazil conducted a quantitative cross-sectional survey to evaluate 125 different commercialized meat substitutes that are available in Brazil right now. And I realize not everybody lives in Brazil, but this is just another example of research that's done across the world. The study encompassed 3 main steps. Number 1, mapping out meat substitute products that are available nationwide. Number 2, collecting and classifying the ingredients and the nutritional data. And number 3, a statistical analysis of the gathered data. The analysis revealed something very important, which is that the majority of the evaluated products were red meat analogs, followed by chicken and meat analogs, which is about 25%, and then pork analogs about 15%, and fish meat analogs, which is about 10%. The main protein sources found in the substitutes were soy products, number 1, with about 77% containing protein from soy. Pea-derived ingredients were about 20%, and gluten as a protein source was about 44% of the samples. The most frequently used fat sources were unspecified vegetable fat, just quote unquote vegetable fat, at about 32%, and then soy oil, which is about 26%. And methylcellulose was the dominant food additive, like we talked about earlier, appearing in almost 60% of all the samples. What their findings suggest is that vegan meat substitutes have the potential to support adherence and maintenance to a vegan and vegetarian diet. But as always, further research is needed to gain deeper understanding into the potential implications of these products on human health. But it is important to understand the additives that are present in these foods are not present in a whole food plant-based diet. So by substituting meat for meat alternatives, you are increasing the number of additives that are present in your diet. The next study aimed to assess the effects of alternative plant-based meat compared to animal meats and biomarkers of inflammation. This study is a secondary analysis of what's called the SWAP meat, which is the study with appetizing plant food meat alternatives trial, which researchers are always trying to come up with some catchy acronym. And this is basically a randomized crossover trial involving generally healthy adults. Participants consumed 2 or more servings of plant-based meats per day for 8 weeks in the plant phase, followed by 2 or more servings of animal meats per day for 8 weeks in the animal phase. And again, it's a crossover trial, meaning that subjects either did animal then plant, or they did plant then animal. Both groups crossed over. The primary outcome was to measure serum or blood concentrations of TMAO, trimethylamine N-oxide, which is a molecule that's associated with cardiovascular disease risk, and found that TMAO concentrations were significantly lower in the plant-based meat phase. Not a surprise. However, when assessing a broad range of biomarkers of inflammation, there was actually no significant differences between the 2 diet phases. So the results did not support the hypothesis that plant-based meats would lead to improvements in inflammatory biomarkers. But the study's duration may have been too short in order to figure that out. Okay, they noted that highly processed and plant-based meat products used in the study might have limited the benefits or the difference between the 2 types of groups. Okay. In other words, had participants eaten more whole plant foods in the plant group, markers of inflammation may have been decreased significantly more than when they put them in the plant group and it gave them processed meat. Okay, this is pure speculation, but it is worth investigating. And if I were to do the study again, that's exactly what I would do. So after all this data and some educated guesses, where do we stand on fake meat? Well, we know in general that switching from high meat consumption to a plant-based diet is going to bring significant metabolic benefits. So as a general rule, we'd lean towards the fact that if you replaced all of the meat in your diet with plant-based imitation meat or fake meat, you'd probably see improvements in your health. But will you see the same benefits as if you'd switch to a low-fat plant-based whole food diet? Probably not. It's very logical. So as we said before, the nutrient profile of fake meat is highly tailored to actually increase insulin resistance because these products tend to be higher in fat and protein, especially saturated fat, which is the #1 culprit for the development of insulin resistance, and they are also low in carbohydrate energy. And these foods are, by definition, highly processed. So we can't really say that this is a perfect alternative to meat, at least not with the same vigor that a lot of other advocates do. It's certainly a step in the right direction to add more plants and remove animal protein from your diet. But we know that processed foods are bad for you in general because they increase your risk for a number of cardiometabolic conditions. And plant-based meats are about as processed foods gets. So what should you do if you're a meat lover who also happens to be aware of your health? Well, one thing that we can recommend are some true plant-based meat alternatives like jackfruit and durian and chickpeas and lentils. If you eat those foods, you're gonna be deriving significantly more nutrition because #1, they're not made in a lab. #2, they're 100% natural. #3, they're minimally processed. They're just roots, shoots, and vegetables that with the right preparation can scratch that meat craving itch. And if you have the benefit that with these unprocessed meat alternatives, you are guaranteed to see health benefits, then why wouldn't you make the transition in the first place? In short, it's likely that imitation meats will end up being less bad for you than the majority of meat products available on the market today. So as a replacement for these products, you're gonna see some benefits and you can use them as a stepping stone to reducing your meat consumption. But if you're actually trying to optimize your health in the short term and in the long term, the vast majority of your nutrients should absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, come from whole, unprocessed plant-based foods, period, end of story. That's all you have to think about, okay? These are a transition food, and it eventually is in the direction of trying to get you to eat more whole plant-based foods. And if you can think about it that way, then you can eventually get to the whole plant-based food world, and that's when you're gonna start to see some significant metabolic advantages. So thank you for listening. Stay tuned for a word about our meal plan. Drop a comment below, give us a like if you enjoyed this, and tell us exactly what it is that you wanna learn and why eating plant-based meat, fake meat alternatives is something that you either enjoy or don't enjoy. I wanna know exactly what your experience is, so let us know exactly what it is in the comments, and we'll get back to you with as much information as we can. Thanks so much. Have a great day.